everybody here to the Sports Talk Nation. Michael Cohen here with you, and boy, do we have a lot to talk about today as we finally get to talk about the New York Mets and what has been a pretty crazy offseason right now. I know the World Series is about to begin between the Braves and the Houston Astros, but there is a lot of Met news that's been going on as they continue their search, desperately in a lot of ways, to try to find a general manager or a president of baseball operations, as they say. Now, if you saw my video about Aaron Boone about a week ago when the Yankees decided to bring him back, I said at the end of the video, we need to talk about some Mets stuff. And it was in regards to what we see here with all these candidates that have come and gone with regards to the New York Mets. So let's go into this. And it's still an ever-changing story, but you know it has been a wild season for this Mets team. It really has. The nosedive at the end of the season in August as the team collapsed. 103 days straight in first, 103 days in first place, and this team still finished in third place. Luis Rojas gets fired, and now you have a situation where the Mets are looking for not only a president of baseball operations, but a general manager because of the situation that went on with Jared Porter, of course, fired after only a month on the job last winter after the allegations came out of sexual harassment, and then, of course, with Zach Scott, who was put on leave after he was pulled over for drunk driving and also sleeping in his car. This hours after attending some charity event for Steve Cohen. Of course, that was not related to either one, but it was several hours afterwards when he was pulled over. So the Mets had to move on from that. So it was been a series of missteps by the Mets throughout the course of this year, and this first year of ownership for Steve Cohen. And here we are, this team's trying to turn the corner. I said it before with the Mets, they need a change in culture. And they've been trying to do that, I think, in a lot of ways, but they just can't seem to get anybody to bite on this job for president of baseball operations. They tried for Billy Beane. He wasn't really that interested. They tried for David Stearns, the president of baseball operations for the Milwaukee Brewers. The Brewers blocked it, said, no, we're not going to let you do that. We're not going to let you talk to our guy. With Theo Epstein, he wasn't interested. And then the story that came out this morning, or yesterday morning, Monday morning for that matter, regarding the San Francisco Giants and their general manager, Scott Harris, who also had a recent interview with the Mets and turned out he was not interested in the top job for the Mets either. So it makes you wonder, what is going on here with the New York Mets? Why isn't anybody biting for that matter? More on that in a minute. Then we have the developments going on here now that the Mets could potentially have a top candidate, potentially in Brewers general manager Matt Arnold, who has been working under Stearns. As I said, Stearns, Brewers weren't going to let him leave his contract, but Matt Arnold is the general manager. It would be more of a step up from GM to president of baseball operations, being in charge of the whole thing. All we really know about Arnold is that, again, he's worked under Stearns, and he comes from an extensive experience with the Tampa Bay Rays organization before that, which, of course, as we all know with the Rays, they have done a fabulous job building that franchise over the last couple of years. They have, even for a team that doesn't have much of a payroll, they have been an outstanding team. They have been to the playoffs the last several years, been to a World Series last year. So he comes from that experience as well, and there's a story that he may go out there and try to poach one of the Rays executives to potentially be a general manager under him. That's all we really know right now. Whether it actually happens or not remains to be seen. And it depends on which source you want to believe. The New York Post reporting that Matt Arnold, Brewers general manager under Stearns, has spoken to Met officials and that he would be a leading candidate. Then you take a look SNY, Andy Martino going out there saying the Mets requested permission to speak to Matt Arnold, but have not yet received an answer. So it depends on who you really want to believe as far as where you're getting your information from. But the fact is, the Mets, at the very least, are considering Matt Arnold now. And if Arnold says no, now the situation could be the Mets could end up looking in-house, Tommy Tanos or Ian Levin. And it just goes to show you, if Arnold doesn't take the job, it just shows you that right now this job just, for whatever reason, isn't appealing. And there could be numerous reasons for that. Certainly Sandy Alderson is a guy who has said he wants to go into the background, worry about more of the business side of things rather than on the baseball side. But, things are still happening. He's the one who removed Luis Rojas as the manager. The Mets made a move to bring Jeremy Hefner back here as the pitching coach. There's the rumors and the story out there about Javier Baez potentially making a comeback with this team, maybe even getting a big contract from this team at some point down the road, even before things get settled. So there's still things that are churning, and there's only one guy really running the show right now, and that would be Alderson. So what kind of power is he still going to have? And I think that could be something that may be scaring some candidates off. Even with Steve Cohen now, maybe his reputation as a hedge fund manager, being someone who's being very, very aggressive, maybe that turns some people off. Certainly Cohen's presence on Twitter, being a guy who is not afraid to get out there in Twitter, challenge people. He's challenged fans. He has challenged players, like his own players, during that swan dive against the Dodgers and the Giants, challenged them to play better. And then, of course, we all know with the bizarre situation that took place earlier this year with regards to an article that came out in the Post of some source that was criticizing Cohen's ownership, and Cohen going out there on Twitter and asking his fans to go out there and find the source, and whoever did, 3 fans would get a chance to sit with him in the owner's suite. So he has a tendency to use Twitter as his own bully pulpit. Maybe that scares people away as well. There are a number of issues right now for the Mets, and that, of course, all leads to part of this idea that there is some kind of form of dysfunction going on with the franchise. But the bottom line is this. They need to fill this spot. They need to find a way to fill this spot because we're entering 2 very critical points in the offseason. Owners' meetings and general manager meetings coming up in November. Then you have the deadline for the CBA, which is December 1st. And there was a story the other day that it's a very strong possibility that we could have a lockout, which means you're not going to have trades, you're not going to have signings for free agency, you're not going to have much of anything going on during the lockout. And who knows how, with baseball, the way it's, as we've seen in the past, you never know how long that's going to go, for that matter. So this is a critical juncture for the Mets. They really have to find a way to get this done. Now, I don't know. Let's just say they make Matt Arnold the president of baseball operations. Do I know what he's going to be as president of baseball operations? I do not. Like you, the information we see here, his resume is interesting, but we really don't know what kind of general manager he's going to be. Hopefully, he's a guy who has a clean resume or a clean background, for that matter, compared to what the Mets have been bringing in the past, whether it be a Zach Scott or a Jared Porter, or even a Mickey Callaway, for that matter. And who will be his manager if he brings him in? And keep in mind, in the way the game is going today, with the exception of the Houston Astros, who, of course, bring in Dusty Baker, Hall of Fame manager, or even the Chicago White Sox, who bring in Tony La Russa, you're not going to have that big presence in the dugout, that big-time manager. So it's going to be somebody who can work with this front office and take, I don't want to say dictation, but you know what I mean, is going to be analytically sound, for that matter, as far as what this front office wants. So it's going to be somebody that you probably haven't heard of. It's not going to be a big name, for that matter, manager. So for those fans who are still holding out hope for a Buck Showalter, forget that. I know there was a story the other day, I believe it was a Newsday, about Brian Sabean throwing his hat in the ring for the Mets job, that he was interested, and that if he were to take the job as president of baseball operations of the Mets, currently he has been retired for several years now after constructing and even deconstructing those championship teams in San Francisco, that he would bring in Bruce Bochy, the former manager of the Giants, as well. Remember, the 2 of them won those 3 World Series in San Francisco. That sounds awesome, but at the same time, I just don't see it happening. And I can't imagine Alderson and Brian Sabean, 2 basically alphas, working together. I just can't see that happening. And as far as I know, the Mets haven't reached out. As far as the stories I've seen, they haven't reached out. But there's always been that suggestion that, hey, maybe Brian Sabean's interested in the job. It is kind of disappointing in a lot of ways that it's come to this, because it's the second straight year where they have struggled to fill this position of president of baseball operations. And they really don't have, the excuses of COVID, the excuses of changing ownership. This was something that they should have been, putting together for a while, and they're just, for whatever reason, it's just not that attractive. Once they get a guy in place, if it is Matt Arnold, fine, so be it. Let's see what happens after that. If it is someone in-house, I think that would make a lot of fans somewhat disappointed because they weren't able to bring in somebody from the outside who could, try to bring a different perspective into the organization. I think that's what they really need right now, is a different take and a different perspective for that matter. As far as this Javier Baez thing, I could spend another video on Javier Baez for that matter, because this story is bizarre. The idea that if you read the Andy Martino story the other day, that everything turned around after the whole thumbs down situation with regards to Baez, and that was when Sandy Alderson had a lot of issues with Baez, and he wasn't too happy with him. And apparently Baez, basically the gist of the story is that Baez took the bullet for the team. He said that the gesture was his idea and that he was just trying to take pressure off of the players, and that no one really understood it, which I find it kind of hard to believe when you consider that Francisco Lindor and Kevin Pillar were all involved in it. And he basically took the brunt of the hit there, and they feel, oh man, that's the last show, sign of leadership, and that that Baez is close. Not only we all know he's close with Lindor, but maybe he has a close relationship that he's building with Steve Cohen. The question is, will he sign? I mean, would he sign for less money than you would think he would be asking for? Remember, he was offered, I think, wasn't he offered like 150, or he was offered a contract of $180 million from the Cubs last year and rejected it. That's, of course, what led to him being traded to the Mets. If he rejected $180 million from the Cubs, he's going to take less from the Mets? I don't see that. And you're talking like $200 million or more for him. And look, he's a talented player. I understand that. He is a guy who has issues, especially, free swinger, strikes out a lot, doesn't hit for a very high average. It's around 250, 265, but it's still a very dynamic hitter, has a lot of power in his bat, tremendous glove at either second base or at shortstop, and yes, is willing to move over to second base. From that standpoint, from the fact that he is a great glove, he's willing to make that move, he wants to play with Baez, it would make sense to make you would make that move, but is he really going to take less than $200 million? I don't know if he will. And again, that would mean if you put his contract with Lindor's contract, that's like over $500 million in the middle of the infield. Discussion for another day, but it is one of the many discussions that are certainly taking place between Cohen, Alderson, and whomever they bring in to run the show. It is a lot going on, a lot to unpack with regards to the Mets. This one video is certainly not going to be enough. We're going to have more videos about this as we move on. Again, folks, leave your thoughts below. Comment. What do you think? What do you think about Baez? What do you think about that? Would you give him over $200 million to play here? Well, what do you think about Matt Arnold potentially being the president of baseball operations here, if this is really the guy, or maybe not? Things could change. We'll see. Leave your thoughts below, and we'll talk to you next time right here. Remember, like and subscribe to the Sports Talk Nation. Follow us on Twitter at OpenMicNJ. Follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/OpenMicProgram. Remember, like and subscribe. We'll talk to you next time.